don't slap them again. Just that much. I'll give you an example, Siddharth, of what we can do short of war. You know, this is the first time that a great opportunity for India has arisen after, in regard to China. And that is that since the overt aggressiveness of China from 2008 onwards, because they said now the finance, till then, they used to follow Deng's advice. Deng's advice was, keep your head low, bide your time, build your capacities. A Chinese general at that very time had added a clause, build your capacity, hide your capacities, hide your capacities, bide your time, nurture your vengeance. But they were biding their time. In 2008, they decided our time has come. The West is collapsing. Since then, if you see the islands of Japan, Parasil, Vietnam, Indonesian islands, Indian border, they have become overtly aggressive. In every international conference, they are overtly aggressive. This has alarmed everyone around the rim of China. An opportunity has arisen for us from Myanmar to the other Mekong riparian states, to Vietnam, to even Australia after Rudd left, to Philippines even, which is now inviting the Americans back after having turned them out from their that Suko Bay or whatever. Now Japan, Subic Bay, then Japan, even a country which never stands up like South Korea, they all want now to join hands. They are talking. And I can tell you, Siddharth, from first-person conversations with the Japanese, which was a retired nation and has woken up after Abe has come, and Koizumi was the one who was waking them up, with the Vietnamese, with Myanmar officials, because I had to visit them at Mr. Bajpayee's asking several times. They want India ke, yaar, tum jago to sahi, baat to kare.
So the problem with that strategy,
we don't want to even exchange information and assessments. So this is short of many, there are many things you can do to take advantage of the situation without going into, as Siddharth said, do you want war? That means we want nothing.
No, Mr. Shourie, I think one of the positive developments of the last few years has been precisely what you're saying, that India has strengthened, I think the turnaround in Myanmar, for example, India-Vietnam relations, India-ROK, India-Japan. One problem, however, is, and something that you alluded to right at the start of the session, when you looked at the contradictory American response to the ADIZ, the Air Defense Identification Zone that the Japanese, that as in India, many of these countries which have problems with China also seem to suffer from the same policy fault lines to a lesser or greater extent as India does. So in Japan, for example, or in the US, you have a strong business lobby which does not favor a rupture of any kind. You have the Pentagon, which of course advocates a certain position. And could we find ourselves in a difficult position, say, you have a repeat of Dolak Beg Oldi, and we decide, the Chinese don't vacate despite a month or 2 months passing, and we decide, as it was one of our plans, to, if the Chinese hadn't pulled out, one of the plans was to pick a spot and erect Indian tents next to a Chinese area. So let's say we create a standoff. Do you think the US would be a reliable partner at a time when we choose to escalate with the Chinese? Or कहीं ऐसा ना हो कि उनके कहने पे हम लोग आगे बढ़ जाएं और फिर पता चला कि जी आप अकेले खड़े हैं. Which is still not saying that we shouldn't do it.
No, no, yeah. But you are absolutely right. That's a very important, that's a theme of a chapter in this book. Okay. That actually speaking, every country will work for its own interest. Second, every country will work for its own interest as assessed by a handful of persons. Blackwell, Cheney, Bush had one view of China. Clinton had a separate view of China. Even the elder Bush had a separate view of China, much more benign. Today, we don't know quite what the view is. They say they will make the Pacific the pivot of American foreign policy. From the American point of view, one day Taliban is good because you fight the Soviet Union. Tomorrow it is bad. So first, everyone will work for his own interest. Second, that they will work for their own interest as assessed by a handful at that moment. Therefore, there is no alternative to what the Chinese call building comprehensive national strength. Others will also take you seriously and dialogue with you on possible cooperation if you have that strength. The book opens, the first title of the first chapter is from the Guru Granth Sahib, Bal Chutkyo, Bandhan Pade, Kachu na hot upay. Well, when strength wanes, then shackles tighten and nothing works. And the last chapter is Bal hove, Bandhan kate, sab kuch hot upay. This is Guru Nanak speaking. So, pehla to hai bal hove. But you have to find, even though the other person may not stay the course, you have to find a commonality of interests. A good example is from Brahma's book on water. He has detailed how all the states, depending on the Mekong, are today worried about what China is going to do. Everybody is worried. In India, we don't even know that the position we took in regard to the Indus is one that undercuts our case in regard to Brahmaputra, as you have argued. So we should make common cause with them in regard to that. We should see how international law can be strengthened in regard to the rights of lower riparian states. That's not all-out war. That is preventing, to such extent as is possible, the other fellow from administering another slap, under which we will keep reeling for 30 years. When we argue that, the question is, do you want full war with China?
Brahma, are there positive levers that India can use to alter the nature of its relationship with China? We see from time to time at the international level cooperation between the two countries, not always 100%, but on trade issues, environment, on internet security and so on and so forth. Is this something that we have neglected and need to push a bit more? And do you think that may assist in altering the balance of the relationship as long as alongside we do many of the things that Mr. Shourie says we should do?
It's a good question. To break out of its insecurity trap, India will have to fully absorb the fundamentals of international relations, including the principles of reciprocity and the building of leverage. For example, diplomacy to be effective must be backed by leverage and cross-linkages and ties so as to minimize the disadvantages of the weaker side and to help build a degree of equilibrium in the bilateral relationship. You often hear from many Indians, China is so much bigger, China is so much powerful, we have no options. That's not correct. That's not statecraft. Look at Pakistan. It's 1/13 the size of India economically. Territorially, it's much smaller. In every respect, it's a much smaller state. But it treats India as an equal, to the extent that even when it bleeds India, India in retaliation will not strike any target in Pakistan, not even the terrorist training camps that Pakistan still hosts. To be effective, statecraft must have leverage. Now, to answer Siddharth's question, on what are the positive elements in the relationship that India could actually employ to tame China's behavior, the most obvious one is trade. The Chinese use India as if India is some African basket case. They primarily import from India primary commodities, mostly iron ore and other metals. And then they export back to India finished products. Their single biggest import, which makes up more than 50% of their imports from India, is iron ore, which is the biggest export to India, finished steel products. In other words, they are stripping India of its iron ore deposits, making finished products at higher value, exporting it to India. Even though, if you look at any international study, China has more than 3.5 times the iron ore reserves as compared to India. Now, this trade between the two countries is very lopsided, not just in terms of what is being traded. It's lopsided because of the huge trade surplus that China employs. That trade deficit of India vis-a-vis China is about one-third of India's total CAD, current account deficit. One-third. One country alone is the cause of India's financial troubles because of this widening trade surplus. Now we have to leverage that in the political realm. We have to build cross-linkages. They're making money in India. They're also undermining India's security. How can you allow that? You have to build countervailing leverage. And I think this is where one area we have to work on. For example, there is no thinking in the government, comprehensive thinking of integrating the economic and the political elements. This is unfortunate. For example, even looking at the international issues, we bailed out China in the Copenhagen climate change talks. We got a bad rap for it, but what did we get for bailing out China? China was the bad guy in Copenhagen, but we came to the rescue of China. Again, if we had a deal with China, we bail you out, we get something in return. But we don't have that kind of mindset or that kind of assertive diplomacy. But unless we don't build these counter linkages and countervailing leverages, how do we deal with a powerful, assertive, rising power like China?
Mr. Shourie?
That's a very important point. You see, making a dealing, even in, many people argue, Arey, no, China is our biggest trading partner now, therefore it will not do something. Arey, they're using you. So one is to build, to do what, or to think of doing, using what Brahma called levers, and Siddharth was calling positive leverage. The other is to think that, नहीं, इस बार मैं उनको help कर देता हूँ, and they will be grateful for this. That's not going to happen. In doing these things that you can do, there are positive levers. For instance, we must increase 50 times the foreign aid which we give. We can afford it. One Narega stopped and you can do something all over Africa. You go to Kazakhstan. It is 80% of the geographical area of India. Its population is less than 2/3 of Delhi. And it's one of the richest oil deposits and uranium and other metals in the world. And they have given 60% of the area rights of exploration to China. I was there recently. You should have heard the representatives in our little embassy there. कि कोई देखने को ही तैयार नहीं है कजाकिस्तान की तरफ. Africa में जहां आप जाइए, they have built a hall for the people. This is one of these Chinese Stalinist structures. But the ruler in Sudan was quite grateful for that. His country is in ruins. But when the foreigners come, leaders come, there's this great hall to take them to. Why can we not do a simple thing in every city, which is the capital city of Africa, build a children's hospital? It's within our capacity. Our doctors are there. They have greater clinical experience than American doctors. Every mother whose child is treated in that hospital and saved will always remember you, as happens if you go to Afghanistan at the Indira Gandhi Hospital in Kabul. So you have to do these things and consciously do them to get goodwill. That doesn't mean Africa will always stand by you by a single act. after the Chinese have invested $75 billion in Africa. But the fact is that the Chinese influence will then also, they'll say, "नहीं, India भी बहुत अच्छा काम कर रहा है." So if just one sentence more. In country after country in Africa, Chinese managers have been beaten. Chinese workers have been murdered. They have been put on the run because of what Brahma was saying, the realization in Africa that China is exploiting us like the old colonial powers. It's an opportunity for us. Indian firms are looked upon as ones that will train people, and so on, that are not exploitative. So why can we not use that opportunity? That is what is meant by using positive levers.
I must share an anecdote with you and with the audience. I was in Tanzania about 3 years ago and traveling with the Prime Minister. And there was one of the events during that trip was the opening of a Apollo hospital for heart patients. And the Tanzanian president was joking because Tanzania never had any facility for heart surgery earlier, and patients had to travel all over the world to get operated on. So he says the Chinese came and built the hospital, but we found we didn't have any doctors or nurses. So the Indians came and had a program for doctors and nurses to come to India and get trained. And so he said, now you have a very good collaboration of a Chinese-built hospital and Indian-trained doctors and nurses. And then one of his assistants joked, he says, if you have an operation in a hospital like that, your life is saved, are you going to remember or ask who built the hospital, or are you going to ask who trained this doctor? So I think the Indian, maybe our forte is not building buildings, but doing training, and there could be a good complementarity here, perhaps.
Our infrastructure companies that are in doldrums here can get good business there and do a good job of that.
But I wanted to ask, is there any scope, and before I turn to the audience, from time to time we hear from some analysts that India should not have given up the so-called Tibet card. I'm not sure if it ever was a card. I'm not sure it's a card today. But is there any juice left in that, or is it a closed chapter as far as Indian diplomacy is concerned? Mr. Shauri and then Brahma.
So I certainly think that it's not a closed card at all, because China is facing a hostile population in Tibet. If we are so afraid sitting in our little, with Razai Odkar, कांप रहे हैं कि भी China is thinking of Arunachal Pradesh, China should think we are thinking about Tibet. Why is it